No one falls to the ground in a parking lot by accident. When a body collapses there amidst oil stains, the smell of gasoline and cold headlights, there's always a story trying not to end. I heard the impact before the scream. A dry sound. Heavy. The kind of sound that doesn't ask for help. It begs for time. When I looked, I saw a boy lying on the asphalt, his body too stiff, his eyes vacant, his breath failing as if he had forgotten the way back. People stared. Some stopped. None came close. Because fear is contagious. I knelt beside him without knowing who he was. I didn't know the name. I didn't know what to do next. He only knew one thing. If no one stayed there, he wouldn't come back. The body began to tremble. The world became distant for him, and dangerous for me. And it was then, in the midst of the crisis, that he tried to say something. Not, help. It doesn't help. He tried to say a name. Minutes later, a black car pulled into the parking lot. Armed men got off the bus. And the most feared man in the city began to shout desperately, what no one dared to pronounce aloud, the name of his own son. At that moment, I understood a truth that changed everything. The epileptic boy who fell at my feet. He was the son of the Mafia boss, and I was the only person who stayed when the whole world turned away. The gas station parking lot was almost empty that night, lit by tall, flickering lights, as if they too were tired of staying up late. The smell of gasoline mixed with reheated coffee was so familiar to me that I barely noticed it anymore. My shift started at 10 o'clock at night, and only ended when the sky was already brightening, and I had already learned that the early mornings bring strange people, broken stories, and dangerous silences. I was cleaning the counter when I heard the dry sound of something hitting the floor. Not a stumble, not a slip, a heavy impact. Definitive. I looked through the glass window and saw a boy lying between two parking spaces, his body too rigid to be just a common fainting spell. I ran before I could even think. The asphalt still held the day's heat, but his body seemed too cold for someone so young. He must have been about 15 or 16, simply dressed with sneakers too expensive for that place. His backpack slumped beside him. His eyes were half open, lost, and his breathing came in irregular intervals as if his body had forgotten its proper rhythm. When I knelt beside him, I noticed a detail that no one around seemed to notice. The fingers of his right hand were beginning to contract, pulling his entire arm towards his chest. My stomach sank. This wasn't just fainting. I knew that sign. Hey, stay with me, I murmured, more to myself than to him, as I pushed the backpack away and took the cell phone from his hand before it fell completely. His body began to respond as I feared. A slight spasm, then a stronger one, and then that strange silence that precedes chaos. I looked around. 2 cars had stopped at the pump, but no one approached. People always hesitate when something seems too serious. I moved away any object that could hurt him and positioned myself beside his head, without trying to hold him, without forcing anything. Breathe. I'm here, I said, keeping my voice low and steady, even when his body began to tremble for real. The seizure came like an uncontrolled wave, not violent enough to draw immediate attention, but too intense to ignore. His jaw locked. His neck muscles stiffened, and a low sound escaped his throat, something between pain and confusion. A horn blared in the distance. Someone opened the car door and closed it again too quickly, as if they didn't want to get involved. I kept my hand near his head, shielding it from the asphalt, while mentally counting the time, not because someone had taught me, but because my body knew that every second mattered. That's when he tried to speak. Not a whole word, but a repeated sound, crushed by the tension in his body. Most people wouldn't notice. I did. I leaned in a little closer, bringing my ear near. The sound came again, weak, almost pleading. It wasn't help, it wasn't mom. It was a name, a short name, intimate, spoken as if it were an anchor thrown in the dark. My heart raced. I didn't know that boy. I had no idea who he was. But at that moment, the name he murmured seemed more important than any rule. Calm down, I murmured, choosing my words carefully. You'll come back. I won't leave you alone. I used the firmest tone I could muster, as if my voice could act as a relay line. The convulsion began to subside gradually, the spasms becoming less frequent, his breathing trying to regulate itself. He didn't wake up immediately. He stayed there, between one world and another, while I continued talking, describing the surroundings, the smell of gasoline, the distant sound of the road, the white light above us, anything to keep his mind anchored. When the spasms finally subsided, he gasped for air, like someone surfacing after being underwater for too long. His eyes blinked rapidly, confused, until they landed on me. It took him a few seconds to understand where he was. Where? His voice came out hoarse. You're at the station, I replied. Your body faltered a little, but it's over now. He tried to move and grimaced in pain. Don't get up yet. He took a deep breath, his eyes filling with silent fear. I passed out? I nodded. But you weren't alone. It was only then that I noticed the strange noise in the parking lot. A large car had stopped crookedly near the entrance, engine running, headlights too high. Two doors opened almost simultaneously, and quick footsteps echoed on the asphalt. They weren't ordinary footsteps, they were coordinated, practiced. The boy noticed before I did. His body tensed again. No, he whispered. They can't see me like this. Before I could ask anything, a deep voice cut through the air. Raphael! The name was shouted loud enough to echo across the entire parking lot. The boy closed his eyes instantly, as if that sound were as dangerous as the crisis itself. A tall man stepped toward us, his face grim, his expression too controlled to hide his panic. Behind him, two others automatically positioned themselves, observing everything, everyone, every corner. The kind of people who don't ask questions. They act. When the man knelt beside us, the world seemed to shrink. He looked at the boy first, then at me. What happened? He asked, without taking his eyes off his son. Epileptic seizure, I replied, before anyone did anything wrong. It's over. He needs to rest a bit before getting up. The man stared at me as if assessing whether I was a threat, but there was something bigger there. Pure fear. Fatherly fear. He ran his hand over Raphael's face with extreme care, as if afraid of breaking it. I told you not to get out of the car alone, he murmured. Raphael turned his face away embarrassed. I just went to pay. His voice faltered. The man finally looked at me for real. Who are you? He asked. My name is Clara, I replied. I work here. He observed my hands dirty with cleaning product, my simple uniform, my tired face. Then he looked back at his son. Raphael was breathing better now, but he was still trembling. Raphael swallowed hard. She stayed with me. The sentence came out laden with something I recognized immediately. Trust. The man closed his eyes for a second that was far too long. When he opened them, there was something different there. It wasn't just relief. It was the realization that someone from the outside had held the most fragile point in his life. Thank you, he said softly, almost as if the word were foreign to his own mouth. If it weren't for you. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Silence completed it. One of the men approached cautiously. Sir, we'll take him now. The father nodded, but before lifting Raphael, he looked at me again. Do you know what you're doing? He asked. I know when someone needs the world not to collapse on top of them, I replied. Raphael gently held my wrist before helping me to my feet. You're not leaving, are you? He asked, his voice almost childlike. That caught me off guard. I looked at his father. He was watching me too intently. I work here, I replied. I'll stay. The boy nodded as if that answer was enough to sort everything out inside him. As they walked towards the car, I felt something shift inside me. This hadn't just been a consultation. It hadn't just been rescue. As the car pulled out of the parking lot, I realized that those kinds of people don't cross someone's path by chance. And that, from that night on, the gas station would no longer be just a place I passed through, because I had seen the Mafia boss's son fall. And worse, I was the one who brought him back. The gas station fell silent again after the car disappeared down the road, but nothing inside me returned to normal. The smell of gasoline seemed stronger, the distant noise of the trucks more aggressive, as if the world had decided to keep spinning without asking permission for what had just happened there. I went back inside, washed my hands in the employee's bathroom, but the feeling wouldn't leave my skin. It wasn't fear, it was awareness. Awareness that I had touched something too big to ignore. People like that man don't just pass through other people's lives and disappear. They mark their territory, even when they don't want to. I tried to continue my shift as if it were possible. I served 2 customers, made coffee, processed payments, but my mind kept returning to the same point, the way Raphael had gripped my wrist. It wasn't force, it was necessity. Like someone clinging to the last step before the darkness swallows everything. I had seen people get sick there before, drunk, drugged, people too tired to even exist properly. But this was different. This had a name, it had a history, it had someone too powerful on the other side willing to move everything to avoid losing. Shortly after midnight, I noticed the car parked across the street. It didn't attract attention. Too discreet. Tinted windows, engine off, someone inside. I didn't need to look twice to understand. It wasn't a coincidence, it wasn't a client, it was surveillance. And the fact that they weren't trying to hide said more than any explicit threat. They wanted me to know. They wanted me to understand that, from that moment on, I was under observation. Not out of suspicion, out of importance. I took a deep breath and continued working. If there's one thing life teaches you, it's that showing fear never helps. My shift ended at 6 in the morning, and when I left the station, the sky was beginning to lighten. The car was still there. It didn't follow me when I started walking. It just stayed. A constant presence. Silent. A reminder. I walked to the bus stop with my heart racing, but my mind strangely clear. I knew it wasn't a direct threat. It was disguised protection, and that, in some twisted way, was even more frightening. I arrived home exhausted, but I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Raphael's body on the parking lot floor, the sudden stiffness, the name trying to escape his lips. I saw his father's face breaking beneath the mask of control. That man wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid of losing, and that completely changes the kind of thing someone is capable of doing. I sat on the edge of the bed until the sun finally rose, trying to understand at what point my life had crossed an invisible line. The call came in the early afternoon. Unknown number. I answered without thinking. "He's fine," said the voice on the other end. It was his father. He didn't need to identify himself. "He's tired, but stable." I let out a breath I didn't even know I was holding. "Thank you for letting me know," I replied. There was a brief silence. "He asked about you." That sentence hit me too hard. "He asked if you were working tonight." I leaned my head against the wall, feeling its weight. "I work every day," I replied. At the same time, more silence. "I'll send someone over," he said. "Not to bother you, to make sure everything's all right." I didn't ask why. The answer was obvious. "I know how to take care of myself," I retorted, perhaps reflexively. "I know," he replied. "But now, I also know how to take care of what's important to my son." When I returned to my shift that night, the place was the same. Same light, same smell, same typical loneliness of the early morning hours. But I wasn't the same anymore. I knew it from the way people looked at me, or rather from the way some looked away too quickly, as if someone had warned them that this was no longer a neutral place. And then I saw Raphael, not fallen this time, sitting on the outside bench with an oversized jacket, his gaze fixed on nothing specific but his body alert. When he saw me, his face changed. He didn't smile. He relaxed, as if something inside him had found its place. "You came," he said softly. "I work here," I replied, trying to keep my tone normal. "I don't just disappear." He nodded, as if that simple promise was enormous. His father was a few meters away, leaning against the car, watching everything. He didn't approach. He didn't interrupt. For the first time, he let his son occupy his own emotional space without interfering. That told me more about that man than any threat could. Raphael took a deep breath. "When I pass out, I get scared I won't come back," he confessed. "But yesterday, I heard you." I swallowed hard. "You came back," I replied. "You always come back." He nodded slowly, absorbing the words like someone recording important instructions. "You speak differently," he said, "like you're not in a hurry to leave." That hurt more than I expected because it was true. The father approached only then. "I don't want this to become a burden for you," he said directly, "but I need to be honest. My son trusts you, and this isn't happening." I looked at Raphael, then at him. "Trust can't be forced," I replied, "nor can it be bought." He nodded. "That's why I'm here, so as not to force anything." He paused. "I just don't want you to distance yourself." At that moment, I understood that this story wasn't about gratitude nor about debt. It was about pure emotional need. A boy who needed someone who wouldn't see him as too fragile or too dangerous. A father who needed to accept that he couldn't protect his son with power alone. And me? I had been placed right in the middle of all this without asking, without wanting to, without planning. When his shift ended that night, Raphael said goodbye with a shy wave. "Will you be here tomorrow?" he asked. "I will," I replied. "In the same place." He smiled slightly. His father watched the scene in silence, his eyes attentive, his mind clearly calculating a future he never imagined he would need to draw. And I knew with an uncomfortable certainty that that night in the parking lot had been only the beginning, Because when you save someone at their most vulnerable moment, you don't just save lives, you become a part of it. And powerful people don't ignore those who hold what they most fear losing. That night, the place seemed to breathe differently. It wasn't just my imagination. The air was heavier, as if each car that entered carried an invisible possibility. Raphael remained seated on the concrete bench for a while after his father walked away, his fingers drumming in an irregular rhythm on his knee. It wasn't ordinary anxiety. It was the kind of tension that comes before a warning from the body. I recognized it now. I learned it too quickly. I stayed close without intruding, pretending to organize some boxes while keeping him in my field of vision. Sometimes protecting someone means not looking too much, but also not turning your face away. When it starts, Raphael said suddenly, breaking the silence, it doesn't hurt at first. I looked at him. It's like the world is fading away. He took a deep breath. And then I'm afraid I won't come back. I placed the cloth on the counter, moving a little closer. You came back yesterday, I replied. And today too. He nodded as if he needed to hear it more than once to believe it. Because you were there, he added. That wasn't a compliment. It was an observation. And observations of that kind create dangerous bonds. The father watched everything from afar, leaning against the car, speaking softly on the phone. He didn't need to hear to know he was giving orders. Orders to reduce risks, to close loopholes, to keep the world away from that fragile piece that was his son. But his gaze never left Raphael, nor me. It wasn't aggressive surveillance. It was silent assessment. He was trying to understand where I fit into that puzzle he never wanted to assemble, because admitting that someone ordinary had become essential to his son meant accepting that power doesn't solve everything. When Raphael got up to go to the bathroom, his father approached me. He didn't invade my space. He stopped at a calculated distance. He never talks like this to anyone, he said. Not about what he feels before he passes out. I met his gaze. Maybe because no one has stopped to listen, I replied. He held the silence for a few seconds as if deciding whether that answer was an attack or a gift. I listen, he said finally. But listening isn't the same as understanding. For the first time, there was no defense in that sentence. There was recognition. Raphael returned. A little pale but calmer. He sat down again and rested his elbows on his knees. Will you stay until I leave? He asked, almost without looking at me. I will, I replied. I didn't promise more than I could deliver. Sometimes that's what saves us. He exhaled slowly as if he had managed to hold the world in place for a few more minutes. His father watched this with utmost attention. He was learning, not as a boss, as a father. The activity at the gas station increased for a few minutes, then subsided again. Trucks, a couple arguing quietly, a man sleeping in his car with the engine running, life passing by. Raphael followed the sounds as if mapping territory. When I'm with you, he said, the noise doesn't push me away. That hit me hard. Because you organize the noise, he added. You give it a name. I took a deep breath. Sometimes the world just needs to be translated, I said, not silenced. The father stepped away to answer another call. When he returned, his face was harder. We need to go, he said to Raphael. The boy didn't react immediately. He looked at me, not as a request for permission, but as confirmation that I would continue to exist after he left. Tomorrow? He asked. Tomorrow, I replied. In the same place. He nodded. Small gesture. Big effect. Before getting into the car, Raphael did something no one expected. He hugged me. Not tightly. Not for long. A quick, awkward hug, but a complete one. My father froze for a second. Not out of anger. Out of surprise. That never happened. Never. When the hug ended, Raphael got into the car without resistance. My father closed the door but didn't get in immediately. He stood there with me. Do you understand what's happening? He asked. More or less, I replied. But I know what isn't. He raised an eyebrow. This isn't charity. Or a favor. He nodded slowly. It's emotional survival, I added. And that I understand. He got in the car and drove off. The gas station fell silent again. But I knew that was temporary. At home that morning, I dreamed of sirens and white lights. I woke up with my heart racing, but with a clear certainty. I had crossed an invisible border, and there was no easy way back. Because when someone chooses you as an anchor in the middle of a storm, you become part of that person's emotional geography. The next day, the unassuming car reappeared across the street, not as a threat, as routine. Raphael's world was rearranging itself around me. And his father allowed it, cautiously, fearfully, but he allowed it. And that said it all. Because men like him only give in when they understand that fighting against something will break exactly what they are trying to protect. That night, Raphael didn't faint. He didn't tremble. He didn't fall. He sat with me and talked about small things. The sound of the hose at the gas station. The smell of coffee. The way the road changes tone after midnight. Simple things. Living things. His father watched from afar, silently learning that safety isn't the absence of danger. It's the presence of someone who knows how to stay. And as I was closing the register at the end of my shift, I realized that what had started as a rescue in the parking lot had turned into a silent pact. A pact made of presence, repetition, and trust. 3 things that change destinies. I didn't yet know where it was going to lead, but I knew exactly where it had started. From that night on, the gas station ceased to be merely a place of passage. It became a place of waiting. Not an ordinary wait, but one that vibrates beneath the skin, that makes time behave differently. I perceived this in the way the minutes stretched when Raphael was there, and in the way they shortened when he left. The world seemed to revolve more cautiously around him, as if any sudden movement could unbalance something too delicate to be touched carelessly. Raphael started arriving at the same time every day, as if his body had learned a new ritual. He didn't come alone. He never came alone. But he also didn't come surrounded. His father stayed at a distance, allowing his son to occupy the space with supervised autonomy. That was new. For both of them. For me too. There was something profoundly symbolic in that silent gesture. A man accustomed to controlling everything, consciously choosing not to intervene. I started noticing the signs even before Raphael did. The way his shoulders stiffened, his gaze becoming more distant, his breathing rhythm changing without warning. He didn't say anything immediately. He just adjusted his surroundings. He lowered the television volume. He spoke more softly. He described what was around him. Small adjustments that prevented his body from collapsing. And each time it worked, his father watched as if witnessing an impossible trick. Not with suspicion, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. One night, Raphael told me that the doctors called what he felt an aura. He didn't like the word. He said it sounded too beautiful for such a terrifying warning. He preferred to call it a slow fall. I found that painfully accurate. A fall that begins slowly, almost gently until the ground disappears. When he said that, he didn't look at me. He looked at the asphalt. And I understood that for him, that parking lot had become a dividing line between fading out alone and coming back accompanied. One night the father moved closer, not to watch over him but to listen. He stood still, hands in his pockets, his face hardened by the attempt not to interfere. Raphael spoke about sounds, about how the world seemed louder when he was afraid. He spoke with an honesty that hadn't existed before. When he finished, the father took a deep breath and simply said, "I didn't know." There was no excuse in that sentence. There was grief. Grief for everything he hadn't been able to see in time. Gradually, the presence of the men around became more discreet, not because the danger had diminished, but because trust was growing. And trust in that universe was a rare commodity. I felt its weight in the quick glances, the indirect questions, the way people moved when I passed by. It wasn't respect. It was a silent acknowledgement that I had entered territory that doesn't usually accept strangers. There was one night when Raphael almost fell again. We were talking about nothing when he stopped mid-sentence. The silence was abrupt. His body stiffened for a second longer than it should have. I didn't touch him. I just spoke. I spoke of the distant sound of the road, the wind passing through the lampposts, the smell of the freshly arrived fuel. I spoke as if pulling someone back by an invisible thread. When his body relaxed, his father closed his eyes, resting his forehead against the car window. It had been a rescue without spectacle, and perhaps that's why it was so powerful. After that, the father began to change. Small details, fewer phone calls, more time spent still, observing. Sometimes he would sit nearby saying nothing, just listening to his son exist. It was strange to see someone so feared learning to be silent. Even stranger was realizing that this required more courage than any armed confrontation he had ever faced. Raphael began to smile more. Not big, wide smiles. Brief, almost shy smiles, but frequent. The kind of smile that doesn't ask permission to exist. He talked about small things. Songs he liked, smells that calmed him, memories that weren't frightening. His father listened to everything as if recording instructions too important to forget. For the first time, he seemed to be learning about his son, not just protecting him. One early morning when the gas station was completely empty, my father approached me. There was no urgency in his posture, just exhaustion. "You know this isn't going to end here," he said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. I nodded. "I know." He was silent for a while. "I can't ask you to stay, nor can I pay you to do it." He looked at the ground. "But I also can't pretend you don't exist." That was the most honest way he was capable of showing gratitude. Raphael overheard part of the conversation. Not all of it. Just enough. Later, when his father walked away, he asked me if I was going to disappear. Not go away. Disappear. The word hurt. "Not while you need me," I replied. He didn't smile. He just breathed easier. Sometimes that's more than enough. Over time, I realized that the post had become a point of equilibrium for Raphael, a place where he wasn't the son of the Mafia boss, nor the patient, nor the walking danger. There, he was just a boy trying to stay awake in his own body, and I was someone who knew how to stay awake. Nothing more, nothing less. My father began adjusting his own routine to coincide with those nights. Not out of control, but out of presence. It was a late but real learning process, and each time he stayed, I saw the weight on his shoulders lessen a little, as if he were finally sharing something he had carried alone for too long. One night, he told me something that didn't seem rehearsed. "Fear isn't the crisis," he said. "It's what comes before." I agreed. "And what comes after?" I added. He nodded. For the first time, we spoke the same language, not the language of power, the language of vulnerability. Raphael started asking less about whether I would be there the next day, not because he stopped caring, but because he began to trust in continuity. That, for someone like him, was enormous. Continuity is a luxury when the body can shut down at any moment, and I saw there the beginning of something priceless. Emotional stability. The outpost remained the same for the rest of the world. For us, it was a makeshift safe haven amidst the chaos, an unlikely place where a boy learned he could return, where a father learned he didn't have to overcome everything alone, and where I learned that saving someone isn't a one-time act. It's a choice repeated, night after night. And so it was, without announcement, without formal agreement, without grand promises, that our lives began to align around that overly bright parking lot, an ordinary place, an unlikely encounter, a fixed point in a world that was always on the verge of collapse. I didn't know how long it would last, but she knew exactly why she needed to continue, because some people don't need to be rescued just once. They need someone to stay. As the days passed, I began to understand that the real danger was no longer in Raphael's crises, but in the silence between them, in the intervals when everything seemed too normal, when his body functioned as it should, when the world feigned stability. It was in this space that anxiety accumulated invisibly, waiting for the slightest carelessness to explode. Raphael felt this before any physical sign. I saw it in his eyes when his gaze became too distant, as if he were listening to something that no one else could hear. At those times I didn't ask. I just stayed. My presence became the most effective remedy I knew. The father began to notice the same signs, albeit belatedly. Sometimes he would approach and quietly ask if everything was all right. Raphael would respond with a simple, almost imperceptible gesture that I had already learned to recognize. It wasn't a yes. It was a not yet. That said it all. And the father was learning, little by little, that not every answer comes in complete words. Some come in fragments that only make sense when you stop trying to control them. There was one night when the car didn't show up. Neither the discreet one from across the street, nor the larger one that usually brought Raphael. The gas station felt strange without that quiet routine. I spent the entire shift with a tight chest, trying to convince myself that this was good, a sign of normalcy, of trust. But when the clock struck 2 in the morning and nothing happened, I realized that absence also weighs heavily. Some presences, when they disappear, leave a void greater than the noise they made. I was already closing the register when the gas station phone rang. The voice on the other end was tense, restrained. "We had a setback," the father said. "He's all right now." Now. The word carried everything that wasn't said. "Where are you?" he asked. "At the gas station," I replied. As always, there was a short silence. "He asked to hear you." My heart raced. "Put it on speakerphone," I replied, without thinking. Raphael's breathing came first, irregular, still unstable. "Clara?" His voice came out weak. "I'm here," I replied. "Tell me what you're hearing now." He took a deep breath. A fan, footsteps. The sound of a glass. Great, he said. Stick with that. Stay with me. As he described the environment, his voice gained firmness, not because the crisis had completely passed, but because he had anchored himself. His father didn't say a word during the call, but I felt his weight on the other end, listening to everything, learning again. When we hung up, I sat there for a while, staring into space. It had crossed any informal boundary. I was no longer just the gas station attendant who had saved a boy once. I had become a point of emotional stability outside of any controlled environment, and that changed everything, especially for someone like Raphael's father, who had built his entire life around the idea that control is synonymous with security. The following night, they returned. Raphael seemed tired but calmer than I had expected. His father was different, less rigid, more attentive. When Raphael sat down, his father didn't immediately move away. He stayed nearby, as if testing a new place to exist. Raphael spoke little. He simply leaned his shoulder against the side of the car and closed his eyes for a few minutes. I remained on the other side, speaking softly, describing the distant sound of the road. For the first time, his father approached and asked, "Can I stay here too?" Not to help, to learn. I nodded. There was no other possible answer. Raphael opened one eye and smiled slightly. Not a smile of relief, a smile of recognition, as if he were seeing, for the first time, two important parts of his life trying to occupy the same space without fighting. This was new, fragile, and powerful. The father sat on the floor, something unthinkable weeks before, and remained there in silence. His body tense at first, then more relaxed. His breathing began to match his son's, albeit awkwardly. Later, when Raphael went to the bathroom, his father approached me. "I always thought I needed to be stronger," he said. "Faster, more feared." He looked at his son in the distance, but he never needed that. He swallowed hard. He needed someone to stay. I didn't answer, not because I didn't have anything to say, but because that conclusion needed to be his, and it was. The gas station remained just a gas station for those passing by on the road. For us, it had become a space of slow reconstruction, a place where no one pretended everything was all right, but also no one panicked, where crises weren't a spectacle, where fear was treated with respect, not haste. And I began to understand that this wasn't improvisation. It was an emotional method, a method that my father was beginning to adopt outside of there as well. I didn't know where this would lead us. I didn't know how long it would last, but I knew that this story couldn't be undone. Because when someone learns to recover from an emotional blackout with help, going back alone is no longer an acceptable option. And I was there, in the same place, as promised. As the weeks passed, the outpost ceased to be merely an improvised support point and became a stable, emotional territory for Raphael. Not because it was safe in the classical sense, it wasn't, but because no one there demanded that he be different from who he was. They didn't ask him to be strong, nor to overcome anything. They simply allowed him to exist at his own pace. And that, for someone whose body could shut down without warning, was rarer than any armed protection. I saw this change in the way he arrived. Less rigid, less tense, more present. His father observed everything in silence, absorbing every detail like someone who finally understands that he wasted too much time trying to conquer the world, when what he needed was to learn to stay. The most curious thing was realizing that Raphael wasn't just talking about the crises anymore. He started talking about what came after, about the fear that remained when it was all over, the silent shame, the feeling of being a walking problem. He spoke without drama, but with a clarity that hurt. I listened without interrupting because I knew those words didn't need a solution. They needed space. Sometimes his father tried to respond, but fell silent before finishing the sentence. I was learning that it wasn't about saying the right thing. It was about not running away from the discomfort. There was one night when Raphael arrived quieter than usual. He didn't sit on the bench. He stood, leaning against the wall, breathing heavily. I noticed before he said anything. "Today was difficult," he murmured. "Why?" I asked. "Because everyone thinks I'm going to fall," he replied. "Even when I'm fine." That hung in the air. His father closed his eyes for a moment. That was a pain he had unintentionally helped create by trying too hard to protect. And now he needed to learn how to undo it. That night, Raphael didn't have a seizure, but he experienced something similar, a silent, emotional collapse. There were no spasms, no fall, no medical emergency. There were restrained tears, tense shoulders, irregular breathing, and for someone like him, that was as frightening as a convulsion. I stood there without touching him, just speaking softly. His father tried to approach, stopped halfway, looked at me, not asking for permission, asking for guidance. I made a simple gesture with my head. He sat on the floor next to his son without speaking. For the first time, he didn't try to correct anything. He just stayed. Raphael cried for a few minutes. Then he stopped. He rested his head on his father's shoulder, something he had never done before in that way. His father remained still, afraid of ruining the moment, but he didn't move away. When Raphael breathed better, he said something no one expected. "I don't want to be just the boy who faints." The silence that followed was heavy. His father took a deep breath and replied, "Then you won't be, not here, not with me." That promise wasn't grand. It was possible, and for that very reason, powerful. From that point on, something changed between them. Not all at once. Not like in a movie. It changed gradually in small gestures. The father asking before deciding. Raphael warning when something seemed strange. The two of them sharing the burden of fear instead of pretending it didn't exist. I watched it with the strange feeling of being in the middle of something that didn't belong to me, and at the same time, being sustained by my presence. Not as the protagonist, but as a point of equilibrium. One night, my father called me aside. There was no tension in his voice, just tiredness. "I've spent my whole life believing that being a father meant keeping everything under control," he said. "But I'm starting to understand that control doesn't prevent fear." He looked at his son, who was talking to himself, distracted. "It only teaches you to hide it." I nodded. "Hidden fear grows," I replied. He took a deep breath. "I don't want that for him anymore." "Neither do I said without thinking. He looked at me surprised. Then he nodded. That was the first time we spoke as allies. Raphael started asking more about me. Not intrusive questions, but thoughtful ones. Where I lived. If I liked silence. If I was also afraid of fading away. I answered everything with simple honesty. Not because he needed to know, but because trust is built that way. At some point he said, "When you talk, I feel like I'm still here." That wasn't dependence. It was recognition of anchoring. And his father, for the first time, didn't seem threatened by it. He seemed relieved not to be alone. There was a small but decisive incident. A customer argued loudly at the gas station, slamming his car door shut. The sharp noise made Raphael freeze for a second. His body reacted, tense. Before anything escalated, his father spoke. He didn't shout. He didn't run. He simply said, "Son, look at me." Raphael took a deep breath. The world didn't collapse. Later, when everything calmed down, his father looked at me with something close to silent pride. He had learned, not from me, from his son. That morning when Raphael left, he turned before getting into the car and said, "I'll be back tomorrow." He didn't ask. He stated it. That was new. Continuity without anxiety. The father watched the scene with an expression that mixed relief and acceptance. He knew he couldn't control everything, but now he knew something more important. He didn't need to. When the car drove away, I was left alone in the parking lot, watching the lights disappear down the road. The wind was cold, and for the first time since the beginning of it all, I felt a profound weariness. Not physical, emotional. The kind of weariness that comes when you hold on to something delicate for too long, but along with it came a silent certainty. It was working. Not perfectly, not without risk, but working. I didn't know what would come next. I didn't know how much longer it would last. But I knew that Raphael was no longer just the boy who fell in the parking lot, and his father was no longer just the man who arrived with fear in his eyes. Something had been rearranged. Something that would not return to its former place. And that night, as I closed the gas station once again, I understood that some stories can't be resolved with quick endings. They transform, slowly, with presence. Over time, I began to realize that Raphael no longer arrived at the station expecting to collapse. That in itself was a gigantic change. His body still failed, still gave signals, still carried an unpredictability that would never completely disappear. But the expectation had changed. Before, each arrival was laden with anticipated fear. Now it came with caution, not panic. And that difference, for someone living on the brink of collapse, meant almost everything. His father observed this change as one witnesses a miracle too slow to be celebrated aloud. What was most striking was the silence between them. Not an empty silence, but a shared silence. The father no longer filled each interval with instructions, warnings, or orders disguised as care. He stayed. He sat. He waited. Sometimes he made mistakes. Sometimes he talked too much. but he was beginning to recognize his son's rhythm, and that made Raphael breathe better. Literally, I saw his chest rise and fall with less effort when he realized he didn't need to defend himself from the person trying to protect him. One night, Raphael commented on something seemingly simple. "When you're near, my body takes longer to shut down." He said it without drama, as if commenting on the weather. It wasn't science, nor metaphor. It was experience. His father listened in silence, absorbing the phrase as if it were a manual no one ever handed him. Later, he asked me if it made sense. I simply replied, "Fear accelerates collapse. Presence delays it." He nodded, as if finally finding logic in something that always seemed chaotic. The routine began to solidify. Raphael would arrive, sit in the same place, listen to the same sounds, breathe at the same rhythm. I would speak when I needed to, and stay quiet when it was better. Dad stayed close, but not hovering. The car was still there, the men too, but increasingly distant. Not because the risk had diminished, but because the focus had shifted. Now the priority wasn't preventing a crisis, it was preventing the fear before it happened. One night, Raphael asked something that caught me off guard. "Would you stay here even if I never fainted again?" The question wasn't about hope, it was a test. I took a deep breath before answering. "I'll stay as long as it makes sense to you." He thought for a few seconds. Then, "It makes sense." That simple statement carried enormous weight. His father listened from afar and closed his eyes for a moment, not out of sadness, out of relief. As the days went by, I began to notice that Raphael talked more about the future. Small things, studying something that didn't require extreme physical effort, learning to drive someday, traveling without fear. Modest dreams, but full of something rare for him, possibility. His father listened to everything with restrained attention, like someone relearning to imagine a tomorrow that doesn't end in a medical emergency. That didn't erase the fear, but it lessened its grip. One early morning, the gas station lost power for a few minutes. The lights suddenly went out, plunging everything into an eerie darkness. Raphael froze. His body reacted before his mind. I spoke immediately, describing every sound, every movement, every invisible detail. His father turned on his cell phone flashlight but kept his distance, letting his voice guide him before the light. When the power returned, Raphael was breathing better. His father looked at me with an expression that mixed gratitude and something deeper, understanding. He had learned when to act and when not to. After that, the father began to apply the same principle outside of that environment. Fewer abrupt interventions, more warnings, more time. Raphael recounted that things were different at home. Fewer shouts echoing through the hallways, fewer doors slammed shut in haste. More short, direct, honest conversations. This didn't transform their world overnight, but it reconfigured the foundation. And foundations matter more than high walls. On a particularly quiet night, Raphael said something that changed everything. "When I pass out, it's not just my body. It's like I disappear." He looked at me. "But now, someone stays." His father heard that sentence as if it were a slow punch. He approached and said without hesitation, "I stay, even when you disappear." Raphael took a deep breath. That promise wasn't perfect, but it was real. And in that context, reality was worth more than any absolute guarantee. I began to feel the emotional weight of it all more clearly. It wasn't physical exhaustion. It was a silent responsibility. Being an emotional anchor doesn't come with a manual, nor does it offer rest. But I also realized something important. I was no longer alone in this role. My father had stepped into it, with difficulty, with stumbles, but he had stepped in, and that changed the balance. One night, his father called me aside for a chat, out of Raphael's reach. "You know this isn't common," he said, "a stranger occupying this space." I nodded. "I also know it wasn't planned." He took a deep breath. "But I can't pretend it didn't work." He looked at his son. "And I can't pretend I don't need to learn from this." There was no pride in his words. There was humility, rare, risky. Raphael began to test boundaries, not rebelliously, but curiously. He would distance himself a little, then return. He spoke less, then more, like someone experimenting with autonomy within a safety net. His father watched, tense, but didn't interrupt. I maintained a constant, but not intrusive, presence. And little by little, Raphael began to trust not only us, but himself. This was new, and frightening, and liberating. One early morning he said, "I think I can be alone for a few minutes now." He didn't ask permission. He warned me. I agreed. His father hesitated. Then he agreed too. Raphael took a few steps back, breathing deeply, focused on the sounds. The world didn't collapse. He returned later, smiling slightly. Not a smile of victory, a smile of capability. His father looked away, too emotional to openly express it. It was there that I understood my role was changing, not ceasing to exist but transforming. I was no longer just the fixed point. I was the bridge between fear and autonomy, between control and trust. And bridges aren't made to be inhabited forever. They're made to allow crossing. That night when Raphael left, his father stayed a little longer. "You know he'll need you less with time," he said. "I hope so," I replied. "That's what it means things are working out." He nodded silently. There was no fear in that acceptance, there was maturity. When I was alone again, I realized the gas station was the same. Same lights, same asphalt, same smell of gasoline, but something there had changed permanently. Not the place, the people. And I knew, with quiet clarity, that this story wasn't about saving someone repeatedly. It was about teaching someone how to come back, and teach someone else how to stay. And some transformations don't make a sound. They simply remain. The gas station dawned as usual, its pale daylight extinguishing the artificial glow of the early morning. Cars passed by, unaware of what that place had sustained for so many nights. To the world, it was just a point on the road. To me, it had been a territory of crossing, a space where fear was named, divided, and little by little weakened. As I finished my last shift of the week, I realized that something inside me was different, no longer in constant alert, no longer waiting for the next fall. There was silence, a silence that didn't frighten. Raphael didn't show up that night, nor the next, and for the first time since the beginning of everything, this absence wasn't accompanied by panic. It came with understanding. I knew what it meant. He was learning to stand on his own 2 feet outside of there, to trust his own body without needing to cling to an external fixed point. That was the victory that no one applauds, the one that makes no noise, the one that only exists because someone stayed long enough to then be able to leave. My father showed up alone a few days later. He didn't bring a big car, nor did he have a visible escort. He came silently, parked far away, and walked towards me like an ordinary person. There was something different about his demeanor. Less tension, less rigidity. He ordered a coffee and stood there, watching the traffic on the road. We didn't speak for a few minutes. There was no urgency. When he spoke, it was simple. "He's fine." The sentence carried more weight than any medical report. I nodded. It was all I needed to hear. He told me that Raphael was now sleeping better, that the seizures had decreased, not because they had disappeared, but because the fear before them no longer controlled everything. He said that his son was learning to recognize the signs without panicking, that sometimes I managed to stop them, that other times I didn't, but that now he always came back. Always. That word echoed strongly. Come back to you, come back to the body, come back to the world. I asked him how he was coping with it. He smiled slightly, tired. He said he still made mistakes, that sometimes he talked too much, that he still felt the urge to control everything, but that now he realized when that impulse came from fear, not love, and that, in those moments, he breathed. He waited. He stayed. He didn't say, "I learned." He said, "I am learning," and that made all the difference. Before leaving, he thanked me in a way that didn't involve debts or promises. He simply said that I had been his son's first safe place outside the family, and that this had taught him something no power can teach. Security isn't imposed, it's built. I didn't respond. Some truths don't need a response. They need recognition. After that, the routine went back to what it was before. Long shifts, empty nights, people coming and going without knowing. But the post was never the same for me again. Not because it held danger, but because it held memories. Every corner reminded me of a moment when someone almost got lost and came back. And that changes the way you see the world. One night I saw Raphael from afar crossing the street with his father. They didn't come to me. They didn't need to. He walked with firm steps, focused, breathing at his own pace. When he passed the gas station, he turned his face and waved. A simple gesture, confident. It wasn't a request. It was a silent farewell. I waved back, feeling my chest tighten and ease at the same time. There I understood that my role had been fulfilled. Not because I had saved someone, but because I helped someone not need to be saved all the time. And that requires more detachment than any heroic act. It requires accepting that staying also means knowing when to leave. I went back inside and continued working. The coffee got cold. The clock ticked. The world went on. But something essential had been rearranged. I was no longer just the gas station attendant, nor was Raphael just the boy who fell, nor was his father just the man who arrived with fear in his eyes. Each of us had gone through something that cannot be undone. Some stories end when the danger passes. Others end when fear learns to share space with trust. This was one of those. There was no applause. There was no eternal promise. There was continuity. There was growth. There was choice. On the last night before requesting a shift transfer, I sat on the same bench where Raphael used to sit. I heard the same sounds. I felt the same wind. But, for the first time, I didn't feel the weight of responsibility on my shoulders. I felt gratitude, not for the intensity, but for the transformation. Because not every encounter is meant to last. Some exist to teach someone to stay, to teach another to let go, to teach everyone that presence is not imprisonment. It's a passage. And when I left that position behind, I knew that story wouldn't stay with me as a burden. It would stay with me as proof. Proof that sometimes the most powerful thing someone can do in another person's life, it's about not leaving when everything is threatening to collapse. And that's enough. If this story has captivated you this far, don't let it pass in silence. I want you to stop for a few seconds and think, what was the exact moment when this story hit you? Was that when the boy fell in the parking lot? When did the attendant realize it wasn't just a fainting spell? When the father, the most feared man in the city, showed up, powerless to do anything? Or when you understood that the greatest rescue wasn't physical, it was emotional? Write that in the comments. Not just a random word. Tell the story of the scene. It's about the feeling. It counts the impact. Now do one more important thing. Tell me where you're hearing this story from. City, state, country. I read this as a living map. Different people, different places, but all connected by the same emotion. And he's not commenting alone. Answer someone in the comments. Converse. Change your perception. Say, I felt that too. This isn't just a channel for stories. It's a space where those who truly feel can find each other. If you've made it this far, it's because this story spoke to you. So strengthen that space. Subscribe to the channel. Enable all notifications. Leave a like. It helps this story reach those who need to hear it. Every comment, every interaction, every subscription keeps this universe alive. Now tell me, which part stayed with you after the video ended? And where are you watching from? I'll see you in the comments. And in the next intense, human, and inevitable Shadow Heart story.